This year I'm changing my color scheme and adding some new DIYs. However, since there's a lot of new members to my familia this year, I thought I'd share some of my best DIYs from last year in case you guys missed out on them.
Snowman is all around town. Watch out for reindeers are falling down. We stay up waiting for Santa tonight. He climbs down the chimney at the speed of light while we're dancing around the Christmas tree, hugging and kissing just you and me.
Hey there, my name is Yami. I am your Latina next door. Welcome back to Mi Casa, where I share high-end home decor and DIYs on a budget, as well as extreme before and after room transformations. So if that's something you enjoy, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe so that you too can become part of Mi Familia. So like I mentioned, I wanted to share some of my previous Christmas DIYs with you all. Now keep in mind, any of these following DIYs you can adjust to suit your Christmas decor style by either changing the colors or some of the elements throughout, but you can definitely adapt these to any style. With that being said, let's get started with DIY number 1. Okay, so my first DIY, I am bringing my little obsession with embroidery hoops to the table. In this one, we're going to make beautiful embroidery hoop ornaments. I purchased these at Hobby Lobby and I have seen a lot of people use fabric for embroidery hoop ornaments. However, I am going to use ribbon, and I found this beautiful ribbon at half off at Hobby Lobby as well. It has these beautiful grayish blue stripes down the ribbon that I thought would give a beautiful coastal farmhouse look. Now for these ornaments, you're going to want to cut 6 strips of ribbon, making sure that they go across all the way over each end of the hoop. After you've cut them, you're going to want to do a basket weave pattern just like this. Then you're going to take your second embroidery hoop, the outer part, and you're going to push it down over that ribbon. After you do that, you want to make sure you pull any ribbon a little bit tighter that needs to be pulled, and then tighten your embroidery hoop at the top to secure. Then cut off all the excess ribbon. Finally, you simply add a little piece of ribbon at the top to hang it from your Christmas tree, and that is it. I love the simplicity of this ornament, but I also do love that the ribbon kind of makes it look like a little bit of a fabric tobacco basket, in my opinion. Plus it has those beautiful coastal and cottagey farmhouse colors that I love so much. For the next DIY, we're going to be using these little birdhouses found in the craft section of Dollar Tree. Now the first thing I did was remove the stickers off of the little birdhouses, and then I gave it a light sanding to get any rough edges or any splinters that were coming off of the wood. Then they were ready for painting, and what I decided to do was do 3 different styles so that you guys can get different ideas on how you can decorate these little birdhouses. And the first thing I did was start with my white chalk paint. I did take my time with these, and for this first one I decided to just do the body of the birdhouse and not the roof or the base, as well as the little dowels that stick out for the little birds. Then for the second one I decided that I was going to paint the roof and the floor in white. Once that paint was dry, I decided to go ahead and use my Rust-Oleum Chalked Age glaze that I've been using a lot for my DIYs and all of my picture frames lately. And so I decided to do the little house portion in a stain. And then I used the same stain on the other little birdhouse where I had painted the body of the house in white. Now for the third house, I did decide to do the body of it in white, but then I decided to do the roof and the floor in a black chalk paint, just to give it a little bit of a different look. Alright, so now that the little birdhouses were painted, it was time to add some little finishing touches, and for this one I decided to actually add just simple school glue to the very top of it and add white fine glitter to make it look like it had a snowy rooftop, but also it had that extra little shimmer. I thought it turned out so sweet with it. Then after the glitter would completely dry, I would spray the top of it with Mod Podge Ultra in order to keep it from shedding and spreading everywhere. Now, did you think I was going to do one of these birdhouses without adding a ticking stripe somewhere? Well, I thought the perfect place would be on the rooftop, so I took some more of my washi tape and I just eyeballed it. Pretty simple. Added one thick line on the center so that I can go ahead and paint it with some red paint. And for this I use some Waverly chalk paint in the color Crimson. With a small brush I applied 2 coats. And then when that was dry, I applied some more washi tape so that I can go ahead and tape out the 2 outer lines. I did 2 coats for those stripes as well, and then I removed the tape. Alright, so back to the one with the snowy roof. Do you remember when I was doing my little snow globes and I actually pulled off a bow from this little sleigh that I used? Well, I still had that bow, so I decided to go ahead and glue it onto this little birdhouse. And I thought it would be the perfect finishing touch for this. I had this berry bush that I have just been picking berries off for different projects for a while now, as you can see, and I decided to add it to the little birdhouse that had the black roof. I thought it would look really cute to add a little berry wreath around the little birdhouse hole. So I added a little bit of hot glue to each one of the berries and with tweezers added it to the birdhouse. Then finally I had these little itty bitty pieces of like a glittered boxwood, and I just cut off each individual leaf, and then again with my tweezers I added it to the wreath with a little bit of hot glue. Then finally for the one that had the ticking stripe at the top, I just took a little bit more of those little boxwood leaves, and all I did was add a couple of them on the corner with some mini berries, and I think it turned out darling as well. And then in order to hang the little houses, I used the same little hooks that I had found from a picture hanging kit, and those were those same ones that I had used from my glass ornaments that I shared on day 2, and all I did was screw it to the top of each of the roofs, and it just took a little bit of trial and error, but I finally got it right and I was able to get them in. I used the same ribbon that I used for the glass ornaments as well. I fed them through the little hook, tied them, and then I sealed off the edges so that they wouldn't fray with a lighter. And that was it for these DIY birdhouse ornaments. Y'all, I am really loving how these turned out. These are so adorable, and you can do these with your kids or you can do them on your own, but either way, they just turn out to be so darling. So for this DIY, I'm using this frame that I picked up at Dollar Tree, but you can use any one you have on hand. Now the first thing you want to do is remove the backing, and I like to actually add paper or cardstock or even poster board sometimes instead of actually painting a piece. Now if you can see here, I actually use one of those clothes gift boxes that you get around the holidays, and I just thought, why not? I had some lying around and I might as well give it a nice use. Then after that was done, I took a glue stick and I just basically glued the paper on to the back of the little sign. Next, I took some Dollar Tree bells and I grabbed one of them, as well as some red and white gingham ribbon that I picked up at Dollar Tree as well. And I just fed the little ribbon through the hole at the top of the bell. I wanted the bell to hang a little bit higher than the middle of the sign, and I measured and cut accordingly. I wrapped a ribbon over the top and hot glued it to the back. Then I took some wood glue from Dollar Tree as well, and I used it to add the backing back onto the frame. I placed it onto the back of the frame, I added the little hanging hook, and I even hot glued a couple of the edges to hold it down while the wood glue dried. I also reinforced it with a little bit of tape on the back just to make sure it stayed secure. Then I flipped it over and added another piece of ribbon above the bell, and I tied it into a bow. I decided to create a decal for this because my kids really love the Polar Express, and I thought this would be something really fun for us to have around to just always remind them to believe. And that was it for this first DIY. So for this next DIY, I'm going to be using this 11 by 14 canvas that you can get at Dollar Tree. You're also going to want some poplar boards. These you can get at Home Depot. I use these all the time. They come in 36-inch lengths and are only $1.05 a piece. Now I cut these with my miter saw, and these were already ready for stain. Now I prefer using these boards because I do think you get more for your money, and they also have a nice higher quality look to them since they are much thicker. But you don't need anything fancy or anything expensive to cut them. I will link a miter saw that you can use below in the description box, and does just fine. Next, I took some Dollar Tree wood glue and I just used it for the mitered corners, that way they would stick together. And then what I did was I used hot glue to adhere the canvas onto the back of the boards. Now we cut these so that they actually lay on top of the canvas a little bit, since there's not really a way to attach it because the canvas is so thin. But this gives you a nice professional look. And yes, you guessed it, I made another decal for this one. This time, this one said Feliz Navidad. There's so many Merry Christmas signs out there, and I hadn't seen any ones in Spanish, so you know what? I made my own. And this one will also be available in my shop. Now, this one will actually be available as one complete one, but here I actually attached it in 2 different pieces. Then I took a small embroidery hoop and I laid it at the very top center of the sign and traced a circle around it. Then I took some greenery that I already had on hand and I pulled the little pieces apart and I began gluing it along the line that I created. After I went around and I created my initial wreath, then I just added some more. I added some glittery pieces of greenery, then I added some white pieces, and then I added some red berries. Then after all the pieces were added onto the wreath, I decided to add a little ribbon and hang it over the top of the frame, kind of like as if the wreath was hanging over it. And that was it. Alright, for this next DIY, I'm going to be using these cute little terracotta pots. And I'm only going to use one. However, they do come 2 for $1 at your local Dollar Tree. And I'm going to go ahead and paint it white. Next, I am going to get one of these foam cones that you can get at the floral section of Dollar Tree, as well as some of this nautical rope that you can find there as well. And what I'm going to do is I am going to take the tape off the edge and I am going to add hot glue to the end of it to seal it from fraying. I am going to place the nautical rope starting at the bottom, and I am going to make sure it aligns with the very edge of that cone. That way everything lies flat. I'm going to bring it around and go over the other end and keep it really tight. That way it looks really nice and clean. When getting to the very top, I'm going to leave a little hole as you see right there. I'm going to cut off the excess and then I'm actually going to stuff a little bit of glue inside that hole and then the edge of that rope. This way it gives it a nice clean finish at the top. I am going to cut some of Dollar Tree's floral foam, insert it inside the terracotta pot, glue it down, and then glue the little tree part onto the floral foam. And that's it for this DIY. Now, if you're wondering where those other 2 white and khaki little trees are from, they are also DIYs that I did last year. And this is what they look like. I also have a video of how to create them if you guys want to check them out, but I think that this new addition to it is absolutely perfect and coordinates so well. Now for this next DIY, I'm going to need a large board because I'm going to be doing a sign similar in size to the one that I made for fall. So taking the measurements from that previous sign and cutting a piece of thin board and then using furring strips to make the frame. I sanded them and stained them and then adhered them on to that board. And I did spray paint that board with primer prior to painting it completely white with my favorite white chalk paint in White Adirondack. So for this piece, I wanted to add some ticking stripes, and I used some painter's tape to protect the frame. I measured 1 inch from the frame and I moved up along the frame, making small markings on the 1 inch mark. And then I used those little markings as a guide to adhere my washi tape. Now once that line was nice and straight, I used that line as a guide for my second line. And I did the same thing on the other side. Now I wanted to use this sign any year, no matter what kind of color scheme I would be using for Christmas. So I decided to go with a neutral palette, and I used the color French linen in order to make my ticking stripes. Now I gave each stripe 2 coats. I quickly removed the tape, and then once those lines were dry, I did the same thing to the horizontal sides. Alright, so for the second and third stripe, what you're going to do is once those 4 lines are dry, you're going to go back in and you're going to put washi tape right next to that very first line. And then you're going to measure out 1 inch all the way down and use those markings for your second larger line. And then I use washi tape for the second thinner line. And I didn't measure the first one, so I basically just used the first stripe as a guide to see how thick my second one was going to be. Now for the thinner stripe, again, I did 2 coats, but for the thicker middle stripe, I only did 1 coat of paint because when they intersected, I want to see the different lines intersecting, and you'll see what I'm talking about in just a minute. Once you're done painting, you're going to remove the washi tape, wait till it dries, and then do the perpendicular ones. And as you can see right here, you can kind of see where they intersect because they're lighter in tone. So it kind of looks like a plaid pattern. So you all know I love vinyl decals, so I decided to create a large decal of Matthew 1:21 because after all, Christ is the reason for the season. So I thought this would be really special to have on my wall. Again, you see me pull out my fabric tape measure. I can't live without that thing. I always have it around my neck, and it comes in handy when you're trying to center things like this. Now this isn't as festive of a sign because it doesn't kind of have all those Christmas things that you would expect, like Christmas trees. So I wanted to show you guys how you can add a little bit of Christmas flair to any sign that you have in your home, especially ones that are neutral like this. So I went to my crafting stash and I got some of those single picks that you can get at Dollar Tree. And what I decided to do was make little mini wreaths out of them. And what I did was I just hot glue and twist the ends together until they did not come apart. And then I used that little form along with some bushes from Dollar Tree and even Walmart. And I pulled apart the bushes and added those little pieces onto those wreaths. Now, in order for these to look really great as miniature wreaths, you want to make sure that the bushes that you use have really small leaves. And I used a couple of different ones that were a little bit darker and greener, and others that had a little bit of that lamb's ear kind of texture. And you all will be proud, I have 3 finger protectors now. I am starting to find them. I also used some of this frosted white bush, also from Dollar Tree, and I took it apart like you see and added little pieces throughout each wreath. And then finally, I used some of these rose gold berries from Dollar Tree, and I cut them up in little bunches and adhered them on to the wreaths. I then used some of the same ribbon that I have been using for my DIY ornaments, and I took some packing tape and adhered them at different lengths from the back of the frame. This way, if I ever want to use the frame without it being a Christmassy theme, I can always do so by removing them. But I think they gave them just the right touch. So for this next DIY, you're going to use one of these little snowflakes that you can get at your local Dollar Tree. I think they come 5 or 6 to a pack. The first thing I am going to do is I'm going to get some of that spackle that you can actually get at Dollar Tree, and I am going to fill in the little hole at the top. I'm going to leave this to dry, but then when it does, I will sand it down to make it nice and smooth. Next, I am going to take one of these little bells, and it does come several to a pack as well. And again, I'm going to take that spackle and I'm going to fill in that little line that you see across the bell. Alright, so next you're going to take this little hexagonal shape. I got this at my local Michael's in the little dollar spot section up at the registers. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some painter's tape and I am going to cover the back of this little plaque because I am going to be painting the border. Now you can choose whatever paint you want. I am actually choosing this black. I think it'll look really nice and classic and farmhouse, and it'll go a lot with buffalo check. So I thought I would show you guys what this would look like with black on it. And you're going to go all the way around and also inside. Now let it dry a little bit and then remove all of the painter's tape. Next, I took my Rust-Oleum Chalked Age glaze and I gave the back part of it one coat. This is going to give it that rustic farmhouse touch. Alright, so back to the snowflake. After I sanded it, I gave it one coat of white chalk paint, my favorite, White Adirondack by Folk Art. Then I sanded down the bell. This one had a larger area to sand down, so I definitely took my time, and that way it was nice and smooth. I gave it a coat of white paint, and you guys know I was not going to be able to do this without adding a ticking stripe somewhere. So I took my washi tape and added a stripe on like the right side of the bell. I used the same black as the little plaques and I gave it one coat on that line. And then when it was dry just a little bit, I peeled off the tape. After that was completely dry, I taped off an intersecting line towards the bottom of the bell. And I did the same thing. Now it did peel off a little bit of that initial line, but a little bit of touch up and it was totally fine. Then I took a ruler and a Sharpie because the next lines were going to be so thin, it was just going to be easier if I used a marker. And I just basically eyeballed the other two stripes along both thicker stripes. Alright, next I took some of these little sticky dots that you can get at your local Dollar Tree, and I wanted the snowflake as well as that bell to be a little bit raised. I'm not necessarily using it for the actual tackiness because they don't really stick that great to thicker material. Paper's okay, but stuff like this doesn't really stick too well. So I added some hot glue to the back of those where those little risers were, and then I applied the snowflake onto the plaque. Then I did the exact same thing to the little bell. And that was it for this DIY. Now these little plaques already came with the little hangers on the back, so these were perfect to hang up on the Christmas tree. Alright, so for this next DIY, you're going to use one of these little Let It Snow plaques. Now, I've had this since last year, I think, and I thought I'd take it out and go ahead and use it. And I am doing a knockoff of the Pottery Barn Snowflake plaque that you see right here. This thing, while it's a little bit larger, I will give it that, it's on sale right now for $279. So I am going to do my best to create this look for less. Now the first thing I am going to do is I'm going to paint over the original slats. Now I'm going to give this several coats, and if you do have this sign and want to recreate it, you will see that it will bubble up a little bit while you're applying the wet paint, but after it dries it actually flattens out. And I think I gave this 3 coats total to get it completely stark white. Alright, so I set that aside to dry, and then I took these little dowels that you can get at your local Dollar Tree. They have shorter ones that come with a little bit more per pack, but then they also have these that come with a few less. And I just basically eyeballed this. I did one long strip for the first part of the snowflake, and then I cut the other pieces in half pieces of that original piece, if that makes sense. So basically I cut 4 more pieces that were half of that original long piece. And I used my miter shears that I love for my crafting projects so much. This makes projects like these so much easier. I laid the dowels on the plaque so that I would know what kind of size I needed everything to be. I basically kept using the original picture as a reference so that I can see what kind of pattern I needed to create. And with my miter shears, it was actually really easy to create angled cuts on those little pieces that needed to go on the ends. Then when it was time to put together, I took it off of the little plaque and I used some little bit of hot glue, that's all it needed, and I started assembling my snowflake. Next, once it was assembled, I gave it one coat of the aged glaze. I set that aside to dry and then I took the little plaque. Now I wanted it to have slats, so what I did was I took a ruler and I took a black colored pencil and I just redrew the slats along the sign. And then I took my finger and I smeared the little edges of those black lines. That way it looks a little bit more authentic and gave it a little bit more depth. Then I took some hot glue and then adhered the snowflake onto the sign. And then I added some black and white gingham ribbon to hang it on the wall. So for this next DIY, I'm going to be using this peace sign from Dollar Tree, as well as a scrap piece of poplar. In one of my previous DIY videos, I shared how I love using these poplar boards from Home Depot since you can get them in 3-foot lengths for only $1.05. Just slightly larger than the peace sign. Then I took some of my Rust-Oleum chalked aged glaze, which I actually have been using for a lot of my DIYs lately, and I used it in order to stain that poplar board. Now, because I'm going to be painting and adding different colors to the peace sign, I am actually wanting to define all of the letters. So I took a pencil out and I started tracing the areas where I thought the letters would end, as well as frame out the tree. Next, I took some wrapping paper and I put it face down as well as the peace sign and began to trace the letters that I wanted to wrap with the wrapping paper. We have so much beautiful wrapping paper available to us right now, especially during the season anyways, so I figured it'd be nice to actually use some of it for decor. So I traced most of what I could of the E because remember it does connect on the front side, and I also did the same thing for the P, giving me a little bit of extra room to work with in order to take it to the front of the peace sign and then make those little details on the letters on the front side of the sign. And I'll show you in just one second. Once I had most of the E cut out, then it was time to figure out what I needed to do or where I needed to cut on the other side where it connects to the C. I tried to rub the areas over where I had previously marked on the sign, but eventually I had to go back and just actually write it down on top of that paper. Now before I did anything else, I put those letters aside and then I decided to actually add some of that aged glaze throughout all of the edges of the peace sign to give it a more finished look. Then I took some Mod Podge and I began tracing the letters so that I can go ahead and apply the paper. I tried to lay it down and flatten it out as best I could with my fingers before coming in with my Mod Podge squeegee. Wrapping paper does tend to want to wrinkle quite a bit, but I found that this little squeegee definitely helps get as much of the wrinkles out as possible. And then I had the brilliant idea of using my gold leaf that I have only used one time before, and I decided to add it to the tree portion of this sign, which I thought would look really nice and elegant and high end. Now, the reason you probably sense a little bit of sarcasm there was because, oh my goodness, this stuff is so difficult and such a pain to work with. But I was determined, and at the end of it, I just put one huge, sheet over the entire Christmas tree, as you see, and then began pulling away from the edges. But of course, I ripped a few areas here and there. And then I took a paint can opener to scrape out all of the little edges that I did not need and were of excess. But it actually helped because there were some little itty bitty crevices that I needed to get to, and it was a perfect tool for it. I fiddled with that tree so much, you have no idea. But after I was finally happy with it, I moved on to paint the rest of the letters. And then I used the color Arbor Green from Apple Barrel. I ended up giving the piece 2 coats of this green, and I used this little flat tip brush in order to make the lines as smooth as possible around the edges of the Christmas tree. Now once the sign was dry, all I needed to do was add some hot glue to the bottom of the sign and then glue it on to the poplar board. And that was it for this first piece. We're going to be creating another ornament, and this time we're going to use these Dollar Tree pearls, some greenery, ribbon, and I thought I was going to be using this jute, but then I'll change my mind in just a second because this one didn't work. You will need a thick wire that will maintain its shape like this one, and if I had realized that when I started, I would have probably used one that was not purple, but that's all I had on hand. So what I did was I started feeding all of the beads through the purple wire. Now each of these wreaths takes 20 beads if you want them the same size as I made them, and each of these bags has 40 beads, so you are able to make 2 full wreaths with 1 bag of beads. So when you get to the end of the wire and need to cut it, I only leave enough of it for 1 actual full little bead, or actually pearl in this case. So what I do is I add some hot glue to both ends of that wire, and then I squeeze it into that last bead, and it actually stays in place very well. And this is what I did for both of the little wreaths. Next, what you want to do is take a couple of jumbo popsicle sticks. You can find those at Dollar Tree as well. However, I had some on hand and I went ahead and used those. So what I did was I took them, and with my shears that I use for my crafting, I cut the ends off of each of the popsicle sticks. Then with a box cutter, I took out little notches on either end of the popsicle sticks, I guess to give it like a little fishtail, almost like a ribbon, but in this case, it's a wooden ribbon. Next, I took some of these rub-on transfers from Dollar Tree as well, and I think these were actually given to me by Kristen in the mystery box challenge this past time, but I never got to use them for my challenge, so I'm definitely using them here. And what I did was I just picked some words that were, you know, Christmassy and also could fit inside of these popsicle sticks. And then when I had my words picked out, I just basically peeled them off and place them where I wanted to on the little wooden ribbon, and then rub them on, and then of course peeled the clear film off. So after that, I took some pics. This one's from Walmart. It's only 98 cents. And I also took some pics from Dollar Tree, which were new this year as well. These were really pretty. And I decided that I would add a little bit of greenery to the top of the wreath. But first, I kind of played around with how I wanted the little wreath to look. I had taken some greenery off and I had placed the little ribbon where I wanted it. And then I finally decided how I wanted it to look. So next I added the ribbon, and I decided to go ahead and put it on the bottom. I then added the little pieces of greenery to the top portion of the wreath. And at this point, in order to stabilize and make sure that the little greeneries did not fall off, I decided to go ahead and add ribbon to this section. So I just cut a little piece out, and then I thought about gluing it on, but then I ended up just tying a knot. Then finally, I added the sparkly little berries to the top. Now this is how it turned out, and I think it's absolutely adorable. Now the ribbon is too short to make a bow or to use to hang off a branch, but it's totally fine. I think it's adorable this way, and I just literally hang the wreath on an actual branch. But you can always adjust that if you do decide to make one of these yourself. So the next DIY, we're going to be using these little birch cut branches that you can find in your floral section of Dollar Tree. Now you can use more or less. I just happen to have 2 on hand, but honestly, if I were to do this again, I would love to actually have 3 and make it a little bit larger. So what we're going to do is we're going to be making a small wreath with this. And so what I did was I created the very first circle of the wreath, and then also counted as many as I needed for the second layer that will go directly on top. Now after I had them exactly where I wanted them, I began to hot glue them together. And at first it's gonna be a little bit wobbly with the first layer of little birch branches. However, when you add the second layer on the top, it'll all get nice and firmed because you're not only be gluing them to each other, but you're gonna be gluing them together, and you'll see in just a second. Okay, so now that the first ring is nice and glued together and stable, you're going to start adding your second layer. And you're going to want to stagger these, making sure that you go over the seams of the ones below. This will create a much more stable hold. So what you will do is you will add hot glue to the sides of the little birch branch cutout pieces, as well as underneath. So not only again are you gluing them next to each other, but you're also gluing them down to the ring below. And once you do this, you will see that it will not be wobbly anymore, and it'll be nice and firm. Next, we're going to be using these LED emergency candles you can find at Dollar Tree. They come in a 2-pack. You can use these, or you can use the regular tapered candles that you can just light up. However, I have little kids and I'd rather have LED battery operated ones instead. So the cool thing about these is that they come with this little plastic piece that you can glue directly onto anything you need, and then you just place the candles in them and it'll hold it up. So this was perfect for me because all I needed to do was hot glue them onto my little wreath. Next, I took some poinsettias from Dollar Tree and I used some that just had a little bit of white glitter on them, as well as some that had like this sparkly mesh on top of them as well, and I thought they were a very nice combination. I wanted to keep this wreath neutral, but of course you can always do colors that match your color scheme. So what I did was remove the poinsettia blooms from their stems. But before I glued any of the flowers on, I decided to take some of the greenery and use those leaves and glue them on either side of each of the candle holders. Then it was time for the flowers, and I decided that I would do one mesh poinsettia next to each of the candle holders and then one white simple one in between the poinsettias with the little mesh. And I kept it even throughout the entire arrangement. And that was basically it for this. I kept working my way around, alternating with flowers, and I even added a little bit more greenery in between. And that was all there is to it. Now, traditionally, the Advent wreath has 3 purple candles and 1 pink one. However, for this arrangement, I did want it to remain neutral, so I went ahead and chose all white, but you can always do the more traditional version and do the original colors. But I do love the simplicity of this rustic touch with the birch on the bottom and the really pretty white delicate flowers on the top. And so for this last DIY, we're going to be creating a mini wreath, and we're going to be using these wire wreaths that come in a pack of 2 from Dollar Tree. For this, we're going to use this cloth that you can get at the hardware section from Dollar Tree. As you can see, I already cut it because this was the cloth that I used for my little mini stockings. So then I cut off this little end piece, and then I cut several strips so that I can use on the wreath. Then I began wrapping it around the wreath and hot gluing it every few sections. I made sure that every time a piece of fabric ended, it ended on the back side of the wreath so that you wouldn't see any seams of where I would start a new piece of fabric. And you repeat this until you get to the very end. I had this cute little Christmas tree that I had pulled off one of those farmhouse trucks from a previous Dollar Tree DIY, and I decided to go ahead and use it so that I did not put it to waste. I used my aged glaze to give it a stained look. I also had this cute little pack that had these little Christmas trees, and it's where I got the little snowflakes for my cork ornaments, and I decided to go ahead and peel the little stickers off the back of the trees and then stain the backs of them as well. Then I got my white wreath and hot glued the little trees onto the bottom of it. And I made sure that they kind of laid in front of each other so that it looked like a layered effect. I did add a little piece of a popsicle stick to the bottom of the Christmas tree on the back to give it a little bit more stability since it felt a little wobbly. Next, I took some ticking stripe ribbon and made a little bow for the wreath. And then it was whether or not to place the bow on the top part or on the bottom part of the wreath. Eventually, I ended up choosing the bottom. I glued a little jute string to the back of the wreath so I can hang it around one of my DIY cutting boards that I have in my kitchen, and I think it turned out absolutely sweet. Well, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed some of my best Christmas DIYs from last year, and I hope it got you ready for the Christmas season. Don't forget to hit like if you enjoyed it, and let me know in the comments below which one of these DIYs was your favorite. Don't forget that on my second channel, The Latinos Next Door, we are currently doing Vlogtober, where you get to see a little bit more behind the scenes in our day-to-day lives. So I'll make sure to link that in my description box so you can check it out. Vlogtober is one video every day in the month of October, and I basically take you behind the scenes and share what goes on in our home when you don't see me on these videos. I hope you're doing well, and I will see you guys next week with another home decor and DIY video. Until then, adios!